Be accountants and attorneys, man. They make more money. No.
For nearly a decade, the most famous signature amp in rock history wasn't actually the amp Eddie Van Halen was using. In 1991, Eddie Van Halen stood in front of a glowing wall of Peavey stacks at NAMM, launching what looked like a dream partnership. Multi-million-dollar deal, signature amp, worldwide hype. But hidden inside his 5150 studio, 3 vintage Marshalls, still warm from the night before. And what happened next became one of the slickest illusions rock has ever seen. It was 1991, and Eddie Van Halen stormed the stage at the NAMM show in Anaheim, California, standing tall beside a glowing wall of Peavey amps. The crowd had no clue they were witnessing the start of one of rock's boldest moves. Months before, the ink had already dried on a multi-million-dollar deal, a signature amp line, a worldwide promo campaign, and Eddie himself leading the charge. The Peavey 5150 was hyped as the next big revolution in rock sound, built to Eddie's exact specs, or so everyone thought. But locked away deep inside his famous 5150 studio in Studio City sat 3 vintage Marshall Super Lead amps, still warm from the night's jam session. What the Peavey execs didn't know was that Eddie had just pulled off one of the slickest deceptions in rock history, a secret he would guard for nearly a decade. Before we dive into this wild, untold chapter, hit that subscribe button if you crave the real stories behind rock's biggest legends, the ones never meant to see the light of day. Eddie's bond with Marshall amps was already legendary long before Peavey came knocking, and that connection ran deeper than any endorsement deal ever could. Back in 1978, when Van Halen's debut album exploded like dynamite, guitarists everywhere became obsessed with one mystery, the brown sound, that rich, molten gold tone that could both sing and scream. Eddie crafted that sound using a 1968 Marshall Super Lead head, a Variac transformer to tweak the voltage, and a handful of secret mods he guarded tighter than a magician's greatest trick. Those Marshall stacks weren't just gear to Eddie, they were him. They were the soul of his tone, the heartbeat of everything he created. But by the early 90s, the gear game had changed. Endorsement deals had turned into massive money machines, and companies were throwing piles of cash just to slap their logos next to guitar gods. Peavey Electronics, based out of Meridian, Mississippi, had a solid rep for building reliable, affordable equipment. But what they didn't have was star power. So when they approached Eddie, they didn't just wave a fat paycheck. They offered him something irresistible, the chance to design his ultimate dream amp from the ground up. A perfect storm of fame, control, and creative freedom. It sounded like a deal made in rock heaven. By late 1990, the contract was locked in, and by early 91, Peavey's top engineers were flying in and out of Eddie's 5150 studio like it was mission control. They were taking measurements, testing circuits, and chasing that mythical brown sound, trying to trap lightning in a factory-built box. But here's where things took a wild twist. Every time Peavey's team showed up, Eddie put on a master-level illusion. The shiny Peavey prototypes were always front and center, plugged in, ready to roar, looking like the real deal. But the truth? The real tones that ended up on Van Halen's recordings came from an entirely different chain, the hidden Marshalls tucked away behind closed doors. Eddie was juggling genius and mischief all at once, pulling off a trick that fooled everyone around him. Keeping that kind of secret took guts, precision, and a whole lot of rock and roll nerve. Eddie planned every move like a mastermind, down to the tiniest cable. His longtime guitar tech, the same loyal guy who'd been with him since the early 80s, was the gatekeeper of this top-secret operation. Whenever the Peavey reps were scheduled to drop by, the Marshalls were quietly rolled into storage, buried behind stacks of road cases and piles of vintage gear. Every visit meant a complete transformation. The studio became a stage, and the illusion began. Each time Peavey's crew showed up, Eddie's setup flipped into full-blown theater mode. The cable routing got switched around so the signal looked like it was running through the Peavey heads, and even the control room monitors were rigged to flash Peavey lights glowing proudly on screen. It was a full production, a carefully choreographed act where Eddie played the leading role to perfection. He understood something most people didn't. Endorsements weren't really about truth. They were about image. As long as Peavey believed their amps were powering that legendary Van Halen tone, everyone walked away grinning and cashing checks. And in 1992, the Peavey 5150 amp officially hit the shelves. And to be fair, that thing was a beast. The engineers had poured everything into it, building a high-gain monster that delivered a razor-sharp attack and that scooped mid-punch that ruled early 90s metal. It instantly blew up. Rising bands like Deftones and Limp Bizkit swore by it, calling it their secret weapon. But the crazy twist? The amp that carried Eddie Van Halen's name barely resembled the tones he was actually creating in the studio. The 5150 wasn't a revolution. It was a master illusion, a marketing masterpiece wrapped in rock and roll fantasy. Then, little by little, the truth started to leak, and it didn't come from tabloids or jealous rivals. Nope. It came from deep inside the studio world, from the very people who'd worked on those Van Halen sessions during the Peavey years. In late 90s underground audio forums, anonymous engineers started dropping stories that made jaws hit the floor. One story in particular stood out, from the Balance album sessions in 1995. According to one engineer, Eddie demanded total privacy during guitar tracking. Nobody allowed in the room, no questions asked. But when that same engineer came back later to fix a mic placement, he froze. What he saw blew his mind. The Peavey head sitting in the corner wasn't even plugged in. The cable actually snaked behind a road case, straight into a hidden Marshall head with a fake front panel. The mics weren't on the flashy Peavey cab at all. They were aimed right at a Marshall cab disguised to blend in. It was an illusion so slick that even the regular studio crew fell for it. Eddie had turned his sessions into a Hollywood-level act of smoke and mirrors, a rock star magic trick that no one dared to question. But beneath all that trickery was something deeper. The real reason his Marshalls could create a sound no other amp could touch. You couldn't fake that tone with modern circuitry, not a chance. Amps in the 90s were built for consistency, not magic. They were clean, stable, and predictable no matter where you plugged them in, a club, an arena, or a stadium. It didn't matter. Every show sounded the same. But Eddie's Marshalls, they were the total opposite. Wild, unpredictable, and full of attitude. When those tubes hit just right, they'd light up like molten fire, spilling harmonics so rich and alive that no modern Peavey could ever touch them. Eddie's Marshalls weren't stock amps by any stretch, not even close. Over the years, he had ripped them apart and rebuilt them from scratch like some kind of mad scientist. He scavenged old Variac transformers from scrapped industrial gear, swapped out tube setups on instinct, and even bypassed whole sections of circuitry when it felt right. Every amp he built was a one-of-a-kind creation, alive with his fingerprints all over it. Just like his legendary Frankenstrat, the guitar he stitched together from mismatched parts and rewired to perfection through pure obsession. That was Eddie, a perfectionist chasing something no one else could even define. The Peavey engineers were chasing lightning in a bottle, but Eddie, he had already moved the bottle somewhere they'd never find. By the late 90s, though, cracks started to form. Around 1998, the tension between Eddie and Peavey finally hit its breaking point. The guitar world had been buzzing for years with rumors that Eddie was still secretly using his Marshalls behind the curtain, but Peavey stayed focused on what mattered to them: the cash flow and the unstoppable success of the 5150 amp. Then came the spark that blew the whole secret wide open. A magazine interview dropped, and in it, Eddie's own guitar tech casually mentioned that Eddie still recorded with Marshalls whenever he wanted that classic Van Halen tone. Boom! The illusion shattered overnight. Peavey executives went into full-blown panic mode. Phones were ringing, lawyers were whispering, and a tense face-to-face meeting was quickly arranged at Eddie's legendary 5150 studio. Sitting across the table were Peavey's VP of Artist Relations, their top engineer, and Eddie himself. Cool, calm, and completely unshaken. According to people close to the scene, Eddie didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he broke everything down like a scientist in a lab. He walked them through his setup, explained his signal chain step by step, and showed them exactly why his Marshalls and the Peavey 5150 were worlds apart. Then he dropped the truth, straight up. The Peavey amp was great, sure, but it wasn't his sound. That's when things got heated. The room turned into a pressure cooker. Talk of contracts, breach of agreement, threats, even whispers of lawsuits flying back and forth. But in the end, Peavey backed off. Why? Because the 5150 was still selling like crazy, and Eddie's name was pure gold in the market. They knew better than to pick a fight they couldn't win. So instead of a showdown, they made a quiet compromise, a clever one. From 1999 onward, Van Halen promo materials still showed Eddie posing with those shiny Peavey stacks, but the language in the ads started to change. Gone were the bold claims that he used them exclusively. Instead, they slipped in subtle new wording. Phrases like Eddie Van Halen's signature sound instead of the sound. Smart, right? It was textbook corporate spin. Keep the image alive without technically lying. That tiny wordplay saved the deal, kept the checks flowing, and left fans completely in the dark. Both sides walked away smiling, the illusion still intact, at least for a little while longer. But the saga didn't stop there, not even close. In 2004, Eddie Van Halen made a move so bold it flipped the entire guitar world upside down. He broke away from Peavey and teamed up with Fender to launch his own brand, EVH Gear. And here's the wild twist. The very first EVH amps, the 5153 models, were finally built around what Eddie had actually been using all along. These beasts carried the real DNA of his hot-rodded Marshalls, raw, unpredictable, and full of life. They had everything, the separate gain stages, that voltage sag from his trusty Variac setup, and that thick, saturated growl he'd spent decades perfecting. Guitar magazines instantly caught on. The EVH 5153 didn't just sound different from the Peavey 5150. It felt different. It pulsed, it breathed, it snarled. It was the real Eddie, alive in amp form. But of course, nobody in the press wanted to poke too deep into why that was. Still, for anyone paying attention, the truth was screaming loud and clear. For the first time in his career, Eddie had built a production amp that truly represented his tone, not a polished corporate knockoff. That's what makes this whole story so fascinating. It's not just about a guitar god, it's a window into the messy world of fame, business, and authenticity. Thousands of guitarists had rushed to buy the Peavey 5150, thinking they were capturing a slice of Eddie's magic. And in a way, they were. Just not the sound from those legendary Van Halen records that defined rock history. What they really got was Peavey's version of Eddie's tone, a cleaner, more controlled imitation of something that was never meant to be perfect. Eddie's real sound was wild, unstable, moody, and alive. It breathed and roared like a living creature powered by pure electricity. That raw chaos was his secret ingredient, the magic no blueprint could ever bottle. Whether fans felt cheated when the truth came out is anyone's guess. But one thing's for sure, nobody ever played the game like Eddie did. Some fans stood by the Peavey 5150, swearing it was still a killer amp that could hold its own, no matter what Eddie actually used. But others felt flat out betrayed, convinced they'd been sold a dream built on smoke and mirrors. That whole revelation exposed just how complicated Eddie's relationship with the industry really was. He wasn't just a guitarist. He was a genius torn between two worlds, the inventor and the businessman. On one side, he was the fearless innovator, the guy who rewrote the rules of rock guitar and built sounds no one else dared to imagine. On the other, he was caught in the ruthless machine of image and marketing, where perception often mattered more than truth. The Peavey deal wasn't just about tone, it was about survival. In the mid-90s, Van Halen's album sales were slipping, and the music scene was shifting fast. That endorsement deal kept Eddie's face on magazine covers, his name glowing in gear shops, and his legend alive in the eyes of a new generation. But that same deal also trapped him in a cycle of secrecy and illusion, a balancing act between art and business that only a few could understand. In the end, Eddie was walking a razor-thin tightrope, serving two masters at once, the corporate world that needed his image, and the artistic voice inside him that demanded only his sound. Every step he took kept that balance alive, but at a heavy cost. Years later, his son, Wolfgang Van Halen, would step onto that same stage, joining the band on bass in 2006, carrying not just the family name, but the legacy of a man who blurred the lines between genius and mystery, truth and illusion, and forever changed the way rock and roll would sound. After Eddie's passing in 2020, the truth finally started to surface, and it came straight from the one person who knew him best, his son, Wolfgang Van Halen. In interviews, Wolfgang began pulling back the curtain on what really went down inside the legendary 5150 studio. He described it as a museum of amps, filled wall to wall with gear Eddie had collected, rebuilt, and experimented with for decades. Eddie was constantly swapping between different heads, always chasing new sounds depending on the song he was working on. But no matter how many amps came and went, one thing never changed. The Marshalls were always part of the mix. Wolfgang said it clearly. That's where Dad's sound really lived. Sure, the Peaveys still got used, but for specific moments. They handled certain rhythm layers, or when Eddie wanted that razor-sharp, high-gain edge to slice through a solo. But when it came to those warm, soulful brown tones, the ones that fans could recognize from just one note, Eddie always circled back to his beloved modified Marshalls. It was like an artist and his favorite paintbrush. Sure, he had plenty of others that could technically do the job, but that one brush just felt right. It wasn't about logic or specs. It was about emotion, instinct, and decades of obsession. That was Eddie, a man who trusted his gut over graphs, who chased feel over formulas. The Peavey 5150 saga became one of the most infamous tales in guitar history, a wild, cautionary story about the blurred line between what companies sell you and what rock legends actually use. But here's the thing. It was never just a story about deception or trickery. It was a story about Eddie himself, the way he balanced art, business, and survival like no one else in music. He wasn't some sellout chasing easy money, and he wasn't a stubborn purist refusing to play the game either. Eddie had found the middle ground, a path that let him protect his art and his livelihood at the same time. His secret wasn't about greed, it was pure practicality. He understood how the gear industry worked. It thrived on hype, image, and hero worship. By lending Peavey his name, his face, and his legend, he gave them exactly what they paid for. The image of Eddie Van Halen, the ultimate guitar god. What happened behind the doors of the 5150 studio? That was his world, and he guarded it fiercely. Then came October 6th, 2020, the day the world stopped. Eddie Van Halen was gone, and the shock hit like thunder. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. Rock stars, guitar heroes, fans, and even rivals stood united, honoring the man who changed everything. They spoke about his fire, his creativity, and that iconic tone, that magical, untouchable sound no amp could ever truly capture. The Frankenstrat, the Variac-tamed Marshalls, the late-night tinkering sessions that turned chaos into gold. That was Eddie's real legacy. His genius lived inside those unpredictable, voltage-sagging monsters, the custom-built beasts that looked like they'd survived a war but sounded like pure electricity. And when the world mourned, one thing stood out like a lightning bolt. Almost no one mentioned Peavey. Despite nearly a decade of endorsement deals, promo tours, and global 5150 sales, the obituaries didn't even bring them up. It was like history itself had quietly decided to tell the truth, setting the record straight without saying a word. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth. Eddie's legacy wasn't built on polished marketing or factory-perfect amps. It was born from unpredictable Marshalls that growled, screamed, and sang with a voice no engineer could replicate. His sound wasn't something you could buy. It was alive, dangerous, and untamed. That was Eddie Van Halen's real magic. Not a product, not a logo, but pure soul poured into circuits, tubes, and wires until they caught fire and sang back. And even though he's gone, that sound, that wild, fearless energy, still echoes every time someone hits a string and dares to chase the impossible. Those amps weren't clean, tidy, or predictable. They were alive. They reacted to Eddie's every move, bending under his touch like they knew who was playing them. They growled when he dug in and sang when he eased up, like they were connected to his soul. Sure, the old Peavey 5150s he posed with in promo shots and used on a few select sessions still exist today, and they're worth a fortune. Collectors pay thousands for them, not because they hold the secret to Eddie's tone, but because they carry him, his fingerprints, his fire, his energy. They're not relics of sound, they're reminders of the show, not the soul behind it. Because the truth? The real Eddie Van Halen lived in those Frankenstein guitars, those voltage-drained Marshalls, and those endless late-night tinkering sessions that went deep into the night. His sound wasn't born in a corporate boardroom or drawn up by a marketing team. It came from sweat, obsession, and a fearless hunger to melt, twist, and reshape what a guitar could even be. And when the world said goodbye to Eddie in 2020, something wild happened. Almost nobody mentioned Peavey. Despite nearly a decade of partnership and a global wave of 5150 sales, the Peavey name quietly disappeared from the story. It was like rock history itself had gone back and corrected the record. Every tribute, every article, every tearful post from rock icons circled back to the same things. Those roaring, unpredictable Marshalls and that homemade Frankenstrat that changed music forever. Those were the true symbols of Eddie's magic. Because Eddie's sound was never about convenience or brand loyalty. It was about feel. He didn't just play his gear, he fought with it, tamed it, and somehow made it sing like no one else ever could. His Marshalls weren't smooth or stable. They were moody beasts that only obeyed him. They'd hum, hiss, or blow tubes at the worst times. But when they lined up just right, they delivered pure lightning in a bottle, raw, explosive, and alive. Sure, those Peavey 5150s he used for promo shots and a handful of recordings have become prized collector's items. They sell for crazy prices, sitting proudly in the homes of hardcore guitar fanatics and gear collectors. But let's be real, they're not valuable because they hold the secret to Eddie's sound. They're valuable because they were his, because he touched them, played them, and left his spirit on them. Those amps carry fragments of his legacy frozen in time, symbols of the man who blurred the line between genius and myth. But the real treasures? The true crown jewels? Those are the battered old Marshalls, the ones with the scratched panels, busted knobs, swapped tubes, and hand-done wiring only Eddie could understand. No modern tech could ever fully decode them. They were part machine, part mystery, and 100% Eddie. Those amps created the fire that powered Eruption, Ain't Talkin' About Love, Panama, and every riff that redefined what a guitar could do. Today, those amps sit locked away, tucked in private collections too sacred and too priceless to ever sell. They're not just amplifiers, they're artifacts of genius, living proof of a man who refused to play by the rules, who tore them up, rewrote them, and changed the sound of rock forever. And that's the crazy irony of it all. The Peavey 5150 was slick, successful, and built for the masses. It looked the part, sold like wildfire, and kept the legend alive. But in the end, it was just the packaging, the illusion, the glossy face of a man who never lived for endorsements. Eddie Van Halen lived for experimentation, creation, and chaos. The truth behind Eddie Van Halen's sound was something no factory could ever copy, no brand could ever own. It didn't live in a logo or a product line. It lived in him, in his hands, in that lightning-fast instinct, in the spark that jumped between man and machine every time he hit a string. His tone wasn't built, it was born. If you loved uncovering this secret chapter of rock history, make sure to like, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button. We've got more wild, untold stories coming your way. The raw, behind-the-scenes truth from the legends who rewrote music forever. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.